The day my father died, the house did not just grow quiet, it felt as if someone had changed the locks on the air itself. After the funeral, the living room held the sore, sweet smell of lilies turning tired, and the coffee cups on the counter sat half, finished like paused conversations. Folding chairs still leaned against the fence in the yard, damp from evening dew, waiting for guests who were already gone. I moved through those rooms slowly, afraid that if I walked too fast the last pieces of him would slip away. Silence followed me, heavy, personal, and possessive. I had grown up believing this house
She
was more
exits
than
the
wood and
study
brick,
quietly.
because Dad treated it like a promise.
The door
he'd keep
closes
when
without
life
a
got rough.
sound.
He fixed what broke,
The truth is
paid what was
concealed.
due, and made sure the porch light was on whenever I came home late. When I was a kid, he taught me to respect doors, tools, and people the same way he respected his own tired hands. Even as an adult, I measured my safety by the sound of his steps in the hallway.
She checks dates
now
again.
every creak felt unanswered, waiting for him to correct me
Years
gently.
before
My
illness.
stepmother, Elaine, had always moved through our
Deliberate
family like
protection.
someone testing boundaries, smiling when Dad watched and tightening when he looked away. My older half-brother, Greg, took after her, acting as if my place in the house was borrowed time. Before Dad got sick, their complaints stayed polite, wrapped in suggestions about my future and jokes about me being too sentimental. Once hospital bills started arriving, their patience thinned, and every conversation drifted toward expenses. I heard my name paired with words like responsibility and sacrifice, as if those were debts I owed them. Dad let them say it. After the burial, Elaine claimed the downstairs as if grief required her to rearrange it. She stacked condolence cards in neat piles, wiped counters until they shone, and kept the television murmuring with daytime news. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed, because Dad used to sit at that same table with a pen behind his ear, turning bills into order. The chair across from me looked too empty, and the light from the window felt like it had lost direction. I could taste metal in my mouth, the kind that comes with holding back tears and answers. Grief made everything slow, but anxiety made my thoughts sprint. I knew families shift when the person holding them together is gone, and Dad had been the hinge for all of us, even when we pretended otherwise. In the week after, people called with sympathy that sounded like reconnaissance, asking where Elaine would live, whether Greg planned to move in, and what I would do next. Each question landed like a small shove. I wanted to scream that I was still standing in the same house, still the same child, but I felt my footing weakening under their curiosity daily. The first real warning came in fragments, the way smoke announces fire before you see flames. At night I heard relatives in the hallway speaking in low tones, stopping when my door creaked. Elaine began collecting every envelope that arrived, sliding them into her tote bag as if paperwork were a prize. When I offered to help, she patted my arm with a softness
Older
that felt
dates than
rehearsed and
expected.
told me to focus on healing. Greg hovered
Preparation,
behind her,
not
nodding,
panic.
his eyes moving over the rooms like an appraiser. I nodded back, saving my strength and watching what they did next. By the third day, I started questioning my own instincts, which scared me more than their whispers. Elaine spoke constantly about stress, about having to manage everything alone, then looked at me as if I had failed an unspoken test. When I asked where Dad's files were, she said she had already sorted them and sounded surprised I didn't remember. Greg kept reminding me of all the help they had offered, even though most nights it had been just me and Dad's breathing in the dark. Their version of events tried to crowd out mine, sentence by sentence until morning. The symbols of the house felt louder than the people. Dad's key ring sat on the counter beside the mail, metal teeth catching the light whenever I passed. A framed photo of him stood near the staircase, smiling, and my chest tightened like he knew something I didn't. During his illness I learned every routine: medications, grocery lists, late-night water, the careful way he liked blankets tucked. I paid what I could without announcing it, because I believed love should be quiet. Now that quietness worked against me. They saw me as background, not the one who kept him steady. Late afternoon, I went to the laundry room and stopped when my name drifted from Dad's study. The door was half closed, and through the gap I saw Elaine's hand on his desk like it belonged there. Greg stood near the bookshelf, arms crossed, listening with the patience he saved for business. A cousin perched on the couch, leaning forward. Their voices were low and careless. They weren't talking about Dad or healing. They were weighing timelines, estimating what the house could bring, and planning what would happen once they handled everything. Grief didn't leave me. It hardened into clarity. I backed away without a sound, palms damp, heartbeat steady in a colder rhythm. It wasn't only that they wanted control, It was how easily they assumed I would step aside and accept whatever they decided. I went to my room and sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling until the late sun turned gray. Downstairs, papers rustled and drawers opened, and the house I mourned began to feel like a meeting. I didn't cry.
Not
I listened and waited, because I understood the truth. They weren't grieving the house like I was. They were planning it right under my nose. Grief makes people honest in strange ways, and sometimes it makes them greedy. At the funeral, I stood beside the casket and watched faces more carefully than I watched the minister. Tears were present, but they were measured, controlled, released in careful drops that never smudged mascara or disturbed composure. People hugged me with one arm and checked their watches with the other. Condolences floated past like scripted lines, gentle but distant, and I began to notice that sympathy often came paired with curiosity. The air inside the chapel felt heavy with perfume and calculation. Elaine cried at the right moments, pressing a tissue to the corners of her eyes
Tea
without
for you
disturbing
all.
her lipstick.
And
Greg
for me?
stood tall near the front,
Sorry,
shaking
we're out of
hands
cups.
firmly,
I see.
thanking people for coming as if he were hosting a corporate
Let's just
event.
begin.
I noticed who lingered near Mr. Donnelly, Dad's longtime attorney and the executor of the estate. Conversations that began with sorrow ended with lowered voices and sideways glances. Words like arrangements and next steps were spoken
Look at
with
this
precision
beautiful
that did
home.
not
The
belong
roof
in a
line gives
room
it such
filled with
character.
lilies and loss.
And these
I
windows
stood there
let in
feeling as though
so
I were
much natural
witnessing two
light.
different
It's a
ceremonies.
really inviting
During the
space,
reception at the
perfect for your
house,
needs.
plates clinked and polite
Hi! Oh my
laughter
gosh,
filled
it's so good to
spaces
see
that
you.
had once held
Elaine,
Dad's
you
voice.
too. How have you
I
been?
moved through clusters of
Amazing! The sun
relatives
is out.
who
I'm
spoke
so
in
happy.
softened
You
tones
look
about
great.
mortgages
We'll
and
talk
market
soon.
You
conditions.
too.
One
Bye!
aunt mentioned how property values in our neighborhood had climbed in recent years. Another cousin speculated about what the house might fetch if listed quickly. The phrase starting fresh was repeated as if it were comforting, though it sounded suspiciously like liquidation. No one asked what the house meant to me. They asked what it was worth. I thought about the years Dad spent keeping that roof intact, climbing ladders with knees that already hurt from overtime shifts. He never hired contractors unless he absolutely had to. He believed in earning stability through sweat. Summers passed without vacations because he insisted on paying down principal instead. When storms damaged shingles, he patched them himself, refusing to let debt creep in through small cracks. I remembered him counting receipts at the kitchen
This
table,
section seems
determined that
inconsistent with
nothing
the
would
prior
take the house
data.
from us.
Let me see.
Listening to
You're right, the
relatives
projections
reduce his
don't align.
sacrifice to square
We
footage
need to adjust
made
these
my
figures
chest
before
tighten
proceeding.
with something
Good
sharper
catch.
than grief.
Let's prioritize
Back
that.
at home that evening, the tension settled in quietly. Elaine moved her clothes fully into the master bedroom, clearing Dad's side of the closet with swift efficiency. The scent of his cologne faded beneath her floral detergent. Greg began spending more time downstairs, reviewing documents with a seriousness that excluded me by design. Conversations halted when I entered rooms, then resumed in a different register once I
Hello?
left.
Yes,
I
I'm
was
here.
offered tea instead
Greg,
of
we need to
information,
talk about the
sympathy
shipment.
instead of transparency.
Okay, go ahead. I'm
It was
listening.
subtle,
There's
almost
been a
polite,
complication.
and that made it harder
might
to
be
confront.
compromised.
One
I
afternoon,
understand.
when I
I'll
asked about
handle it.
estate details, Elaine smiled with a softness that felt rehearsed. She told me I did not need to worry about grown-up matters, that stress would only deepen my sadness. Greg echoed her tone, suggesting I focus on finding direction for my own future. The implications settled over me slowly. I was not being consulted because I was not considered permanent. I began to feel like a guest overstaying a visit, rather than someone who had shared every hallway of this house since childhood. The flowers from the funeral started to wilt, petals browning at the edges, drooping into the vases that crowded our countertops. Their decay mirrored my shifting awareness. Black clothes that had felt sacred days earlier were folded and returned to closets, as if mourning had an expiration date. With each practical gesture, the household seemed to move on from Dad, while I remained anchored to him. The speed at which they transitioned unsettled me more than their words. It suggested preparation long before the funeral. In the quiet moments of evening, when the house settled and footsteps softened, I replayed something Dad once told me during one of his weaker weeks. He had been unusually serious, reminding me to keep important paperwork safe and never assume that trust replaces documentation. At the time, I thought he was speaking generally, the way older men do when contemplating mortality. Now the memory pressed against my thoughts with new urgency.
I don't think she's
I
here.
pictured his study, the heavy
Check
oak
the
desk,
back rooms.
and the bottom drawer he always kept locked.
Keep your voice
My
down.
grief began to transform into something sharper and more alert. It was not anger yet, but a steady unease that refused to be ignored. I started paying attention to small details, which envelopes disappeared into Elaine's purse, which files Greg reviewed without explanation. which conversations lowered their volume when I approached. I realized that while I had been mourning, others had been organizing. Their efficiency felt too rehearsed to be accidental. The first direct suggestion arrived 3 days after the funeral, delivered in a tone that aimed for kindness but landed as dismissal. Elaine mentioned that it might be healthy for me to find my own place soon, to create independence and space for healing. Greg nodded, adding that the house carried too many memories, and that a fresh start could be good for everyone. They spoke as if the decision were mutual, already agreed upon. I listened without interrupting, aware that my silence unsettled them more than resistance would have. That night, I stood alone in the hallway, looking at the framed photograph of Dad near the staircase. His expression held a quiet steadiness I had taken for granted. The house no longer felt merely sad, it felt strategic. I understood then that grief had stripped away polite masks, revealing intentions that had likely existed long before his final breath. The funeral smiles, the careful condolences, the calculated handshakes, they had all pointed toward something larger. I walked past the fading flowers and into Dad's study, my heart steady despite the tension humming beneath my ribs. If they believed I was too heartbroken to notice their plans, they were mistaken. My grief had sharpened my awareness, not dulled it. As I looked at the locked drawer beneath his desk, I felt certainty replace doubt. They thought I was standing still, overwhelmed and passive, but I had already started looking for answers. Sometimes the truth hides in the quietest corner of the house, the one no one thinks to check. That night, after Elaine and Greg finally settled downstairs and the television went dark, I waited until the house slipped into its deepest stillness. The kind of silence that feels like it has weight, like it presses against doors and corners, and makes your footsteps sound louder than they should. I moved slowly, careful with every breath, because the whole place felt wired with watchful nerve. Even the hallway seemed to remember who used to walk it with purpose. Dad's study sat at the end of the corridor like a room that had been closed mid-sentence. I eased the door open and stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The air smelled like paper and old wood, familiar and strangely comforting. A thin layer of dust floated in the lamplight from the desk lamp I clicked on, drifting like tiny ghosts that had nowhere else to go. His chair was still tucked in, perfectly angled as if he might return to it after a break. Seeing it untouched made my throat tighten, and for a second I thought I should leave. Some part of me feared that opening his things would feel like betrayal, like I would be stealing the last private pieces of him. But another part of me, the part that had been listening to whispered plans and polite threats, knew I didn't have the luxury of sentimentality anymore. I crossed the room and placed my hand on the desk. The wood was cool beneath my palm, steady, solid, the same surface where Dad used to sort bills and write notes in his careful, slanted handwriting. In the lower drawer, the one he always kept locked, the metal keyhole stared back at me like an accusation. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring at it, debating whether I was about
House
to confirm
behind
my
her.
worst fears or discover something that made them worse.
Foundation
I
solid.
knew where the key was, because Dad never really hid it from me.
Identity
It
anchored.
used to hang on a small ring behind a framed photo
She
on the
steps
bookshelf,
forward
tucked
confidently,
just out of sight unless you knew the trick.
not
That
leaving,
realization hit me
choosing.
with a strange ache. Even in
Power
his privacy, he had
reframed.
left me a way in. I pulled the frame
Life
forward, reached
life
behind it,
continues.
and felt the cold bite of metal against my fingertips.
No
The
fear.
key slid into my hand with a quiet certainty that made my chest flutter. For a moment I held it there, staring at it as if it might speak. When I inserted it into the lock, the soft click sounded too loud in the still house. I froze, listening for movement downstairs, but only the refrigerator's distant hum answered me. I turned the key slowly, the mechanism giving way with a reluctant scrape, and pulled the drawer open. The smell of paper rose up, sharper than the rest of the room. Inside were folders stacked neatly, edges squared, as if Dad had prepared them with a seriousness he never voiced aloud. My hands trembled as I lifted the first folder, not because I was afraid of the papers themselves, but because I was afraid of what they might mean. At the top were deeds, crisp copies and originals in protective sleeve. Beneath them were insurance papers and account statements, all organized with the quiet discipline
A new
Dad
day
lived by.
begins.
I flipped through slowly, my
No
eyes
conflict
scanning lines
present.
and signatures as if I could will them into making
Strength
sense. Then I saw a
remains.
document that looked different from the rest, official, notarized, stamped, folded once and smoothed back out. My pulse picked up. I unfolded it carefully, and the words on the page pulled the air from my lungs. The deed to the house listed my name. I stared, convinced I had misread it. I traced the letters with my eyes again, then again, as if repetition would change the truth into something safer. But it didn't. My name was printed clearly,
Darkness
legally, in
gentle,
the
not
space where
threatening.
ownership was declared. The date
Sleep
on the
earned.
document wasn't recent. It was years
Cycle
earlier,
ends.
long before Dad's illness turned the house into a battleground of quiet power. My mind tried to reject it, tried to explain it away as a mistake or a draft or something incomplete, but the notarization was there, the signatures were there, the certainty of it was there. Dad had transferred the house to me while he was still alive. Shock came first, sharp and disorienting, followed immediately by a wave of validation that made my eyes burn. All the subtle exclusions, the whispered plans, the way Elaine and Greg spoke as if the house were already theirs. It wasn't just cruel. It was wrong. They weren't pushing me out of their home. They were pushing me out of mine. That realization didn't make me feel triumphant. It made me feel exposed. Like I had been standing in the middle of a storm without knowing I held the only umbrella. As I sat down in Dad's chair, the leather creaked under my weight in a sound that felt painfully intimate. A memory surfaced, uninvited, from years ago when I was still young enough to think adults always did the right thing. Dad had been repairing a loose railing on the porch, tightening bolts while I held the flashlight. He had told me that responsibility isn't what you say you'll do. It's what you quietly handle when no one is watching. He said people can smile and still take from you, and that the best protection isn't anger, it's preparation. At the time, I thought he was just being practical. Now it felt like he had been teaching me how
This
to
place
survive
holds
my
so
own
many
family.
memories.
Another flashback
I'm
followed,
grateful.
softer but heavier. Dad sitting at the kitchen table,
Not with
looking
grief,
tired,
but with
warning me
thanks.
not to let anyone make me feel like I owed them for existing. He had never named Elaine or Greg directly, but his eyes always flicked toward the hallway when he said it, as if he couldn't bring himself to speak the truth out loud. I remembered thinking he was being paranoid, that families were complicated but not dangerous. Sitting in his study with that deed in my hands, I understood he had been seeing things clearly, while I
Past
was still
discarded.
trying to believe in the best version
Old
of
empty
everyone.
boxes
And
flattened.
yet, questions rushed in right behind the validation.
Thrown away.
If Dad had done this, why
False
didn't
exit
he tell me
erased.
directly? Why didn't he sit me down and explain, plainly, what he had put in motion? Why leave me to discover it like this, in the middle of the night, with my hands shaking and my grief still raw? Maybe he thought telling me would paint a target on my back. Maybe he believed secrecy was the safest shield. Or maybe he couldn't bear the confrontation it would create while he was still alive. The thought that Dad had carried this decision alone made my chest ache all over again. I gathered the documents into my arms like they were fragile, like they might crumble if I held them too tightly. The house felt different now, not because the walls had changed, but because my
The
understanding
book
had.
closes
The power
gently,
dynamic
with the
Elaine and
bookmark
Greg
left in
were
place.
operating under was
The
an
story
illusion,
continues.
and the truth was sitting in my hands like a quiet weapon I didn't know how to use yet. I wasn't sure what kind of person I wanted to be in the moment that truth came out. I didn't want chaos. I didn't want screaming or humiliation. I wanted dignity, and I wanted my father's
No
legacy to
burden
mean something
carried.
beyond a fight. I chose caution. I didn't storm downstairs. I didn't
Peace
confront anyone in the heat
earned.
of discovery. Instead, I made copies, slipped originals into a plain envelope, and hid them where no one would look. Inside an old photo album in my closet, tucked behind pictures of birthdays and holidays that Elaine rarely touched. The irony wasn't lost on me. The evidence of ownership, the proof of my future, sat behind memories of a family that had already started treating me like an outsider. Before leaving the study, I turned off the lamp and looked around one last time. The dust in the air had settled. The chair was no longer untouched. And I felt, for the first time since Dad died, something steadier than grief. Not happiness. Not relief. Something like readiness. I understood now that Elaine and Greg were acting with confidence because they believed they held the cards. They didn't know my father had already played his hand. I went to bed but didn't sleep much. Every
Original
time I
deed
closed
placed
my
in
eyes,
secure
the
folder.
deed flashed in my mind.
Folder
And with it came
closes.
the looming awareness that the morning would bring another
Chapter
performance.
sealed.
They would speak to me with practiced concern. They would frame decisions as inevitabilities. They would assume my compliance because they had always assumed it. Lying there in the dark, I listened to the house settle around me and realized that Dad had not only left me a home, he had left me a choice about who I would be inside it. The next morning, as sunlight spilled into the kitchen and Elaine poured coffee like nothing had changed, they sat me down with faces carefully arranged into sympathy and firmness. Greg leaned against the counter, arms crossed, waiting for my reaction like it was already predictable. Elaine's voice was gentle enough to fool a stranger, but I heard the steel beneath it when she said I needed to start making plans. She told me I had 30 days to leave. Being told to leave your own house is a special kind of humiliation. The kitchen was bright that morning, sunlight catching on the clean counters Elaine had scrubbed into a shine, as if order could erase what had happened. The smell of coffee filled the room, warm and familiar, but it did nothing to soften the tension waiting at the table. Elaine sat in Dad's chair with an air of practiced calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Greg stood nearby, close enough to feel like backup, far enough to pretend he wasn't part of the decision. The chair across from Elaine was left open for me like a courtroom seat, and the moment I sat down, I understood this wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict.
Imperfect.
Elaine began with softness, the way people do when they want to sound reasonable while taking
Home
something from
complete.
me. She said she understood I was hurting, that grief can make people cling to the familiar, and that she wanted what was best for me. Her voice carried the careful rhythm of someone who'd rehearsed the speech in the mirror, trimming every harsh edge
She places keys
until it
in
could
bowl
pass
by
as
door.
kindness. Then
Same
she said
keys,
it plainly,
new
as if
meaning.
stating a fact of nature. It was time
Authority
for me to start
normalized.
an independent life. She described it like a healthy step, a mature choice, something Dad would have wanted if he were here to advise me. Her use of his name felt like a theft. Greg added his own version of concern, making sure the message landed with weight. He talked about the future, about adult responsibilities, about not letting grief trap me in the past. He didn't look at me when he spoke. His eyes stayed on the table, on the mail stack, on anything except my face. That small detail told me he wasn't uncertain or conflicted. He was committed to pretending this was for my benefit, because that lie was easier than admitting the truth. Elaine nodded along, like a manager approving a plan. Then the accusations began slipping in, subtle enough to deny later if I challenged them. Elaine mentioned how expensive everything had become, how the house required upkeep, how bills didn't pause for grief. She said she and Greg had been handling so much already, carrying a load that wasn't fair. The word burden was never spoken directly, but it hung in the room like humidity. Greg spoke about contributions, about how everyone needed to pull their weight. He said it the way people say something obvious, like I should be ashamed for not offering more. I thought about the nights I'd stayed awake listening to Dad breathe, the errands, the payments I made quietly, the appointments, the medications. None of it counted because it didn't fit their narrative. Shock ran through me first, not because I didn't expect hostility, but because of how calmly they delivered it. Elaine's smile didn't change. Greg's tone stayed even. The cruelty wasn't loud, it was administrative. I felt anger rise behind my ribs, hot and immediate, but I kept my face still. I didn't give them tears. I didn't give them a reaction they could label as unstable. Instead, I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Long enough for them to realize I was listening in a different way now. Elaine leaned forward slightly, her eyes softening as if to pull guilt out of me like a thread. She spoke about moving on, about not living in Dad's shadow, about how staying in the house would only keep me stuck. She framed the eviction as healing, as if the pain of being pushed out could be packaged as therapy. Greg backed her up with a quiet sigh, the kind meant to signal that I was being difficult without having to say it. They wanted me to feel childish,
Maintenance states
wanting
marked.
to remain. They wanted me to
Prepared,
believe that leaving
not
would
anxious.
prove maturity. And beneath all of it,
Stability
I could hear
structured.
the unspoken message: this house is not yours anymore. Then Elaine got
Okay,
up suddenly.
notebook updated.
She didn't say the word
Now,
readily, but
highlighting the
eagerness
savings
showed in the
column.
way she leaned into it.
This will
She
help
said
with
the market
future
was
planned
favorable,
expenses.
that it would be practical to list soon, and that proceeds could help everyone start fresh. Greg mentioned splitting things fairly, like he was already calculating numbers in his head. I sat there and watched them talk about dividing money from a property they did not own,
Stillness.
and I realized how completely they had convinced
No
themselves
longer
of their right to
threatening.
it. It wasn't just opportunism. It was entitlement dressed as logic. All the while, I held the truth inside me like a stone. I knew what was in the envelope hidden upstairs. I knew what Dad had done years ago, quietly, deliberately, without giving anyone else a chance to interfere. The deed with my name wasn't a rumor or a hope. It was a fact. That knowledge didn't erase the humiliation, but it changed its shape. Instead of feeling powerless, I felt like I was watching a performance from behind the curtain. They were delivering lines to a role they assumed I still played.
Work
The obedient
finished.
child, the temporary
Self-reliance
resident,
shown.
the one who would accept whatever was handed down. They didn't know the script had changed, and that is where strategy began to replace instinct. My first impulse was to pull out the document and end the conversation in one clean blow, to watch their confidence collapse in real time. But I didn't. I saw something in their faces, Elaine's certainty, Greg's smug restraint. That told me this wasn't the full story yet. If they were willing to push me out so calmly, what else had they already planned? Had they contacted a realtor? Were they moving money around? Were there other documents Elaine had taken that mattered? If I revealed ownership too soon, they would switch tactics. They would cry, plead, accuse, rewrite the story again. I needed to know how far they were willing to go while they still thought they were in control. Elaine reached for the key ring on the counter, the same ring Dad always carried, and placed it on the table in front of me, as if she were granting access to something generous. The metal clinked softly, and that sound made my jaw tighten. It was an attempt to make the
morning
moment
air is
symbolic,
cool.
to establish authority. The keys sat between us
A
like
peaceful
a boundary
start
line,
to the
and
day.
my coffee, poured minutes earlier, cooled untouched beside my hand. I watched steam disappear
Golden
from the
light
surface
touches
until it was
windows.
just a dark stillness, and it
House
felt like
no
a
longer
perfect
threatened.
reflection of what they were trying to do.
Home
Take warmth
reclaimed.
out of my life and call it progress. Greg finally looked at me then, eyes narrowed slightly, waiting. It wasn't concern, it was expectation. He wanted me to protest so he could label me ungrateful. He wanted me to cry so he could dismiss me as emotional. The old accusation hovered near the surface, the familiar family narrative that I was the one who owed, the one who took, the one who didn't appreciate what others provided. Sitting there,
Legacy.
knowing the house was legally mine, the accusation flipped in my mind like a
Accepted.
switch. If anyone was ungrateful, it wasn't me. It was the people who believed they could erase years of my loyalty, because Dad was no longer
Space
there to stop them.
reclaimed.
I kept my voice even when I spoke.
Room to grow.
I said I understood they wanted stability. I said I would consider my options. I didn't promise to leave. I didn't agree to their timeline. I gave them just enough to satisfy their need for control without giving away my leverage. Elaine's shoulders loosened slightly, as if my cooperation confirmed her authority. Greg nodded once, like he'd won. They thought my calm meant surrender. They mistook silence for defeat, because that was what it used to mean. When the meeting ended, I carried my cold coffee to the sink and rinsed the mug slowly, letting the water run a little longer than necessary. The sound covered my thoughts. Upstairs, the envelope with the deed waited where I'd hidden it, and for the first time I understood that I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. They believed they had delivered an eviction notice backed by power, but what they had really done was reveal their intentions, clearly enough for me to act without guilt. They thought I was going to spend the next 30 days packing my life into boxes
Security
and accepting
confirmed.
whatever future they assigned me. In reality, I was preparing to stay. There is a strange power in watching people celebrate something they don't actually own. After that morning at the kitchen table, the house shifted into a new routine that wasn't about grief anymore. It was about control, appearances, and momentum. Elaine and Greg moved through the rooms as if they'd been waiting for permission that never actually existed, their energy sharp and purposeful. They spoke louder than before, made lists, took phone calls with the confidence of people who believed the future had already been decided. Meanwhile, I stayed mostly upstairs, not hiding, not fleeing. Simply watching the whole performance unfold with a calm I didn't know I had. Within days, Elaine started cleaning with a kind of aggression that went beyond tidying. She scrubbed baseboards, polished fixtures, and rearranged shelves as if the house needed to be reset into her version of it. Greg carried trash bags out to the curb, like he was clearing out someone else's clutter, though half of what he tossed had been part of this home long before he cared about it. I noticed my things disappearing from common areas in small, careful moves. A framed photo of Dad and me on the mantel vanished one afternoon and reappeared in a box near the garage. A throw blanket I always used in the living room was folded and placed on a chair upstairs without a word. It was subtle enough to deny, but consistent enough to be intentional. They were erasing me room by room. Elaine began taking calls in the kitchen, speaking in that upbeat, efficient tone she saved for strangers. She talked about the neighborhood, the great
Frame
bones
returned to wall.
of the house, and how quickly properties were
Level
moving.
adjusted.
The word realtor became part of daily conversation,
Order restored.
tossed around casually like it was inevitable. Greg chimed in with numbers,
Letter
estimates,
placed
and
behind
timing,
photo.
sometimes loud enough for me to hear from the staircase.
Back
They didn't
sealed.
ask my opinion. They didn't even
Message
pretend to.
protected.
In their minds, the house had already transferred to them the moment Dad's funeral ended. All they had to do now was execute. I kept my own routine simple. I woke early, made coffee upstairs, and sat near my bedroom window as the sun rose over the backyard fence. The light spilled across the floor in soft bands, warm and steady, and I let it anchor me. I thought about Dad in those mornings, how he used to wake before everyone else and
She
stand on the
nods
porch for a
once.
minute, listening to birds like they were giving him a
Understanding
report on the
complete.
day. Watching the sunrise made me
No
feel close
doubt
to him in a
left.
quiet way that didn't require anyone else's permission.
Dad, is it
It also
fixed yet?
reminded me of something important.
Almost,
Time
son.
was on
Hold
my
that
side,
light
not
steady.
theirs. To keep up
See?
appearances,
Little patience
I
makes
began
it
packing
strong.
a few boxes, but I never sealed them.
I get
I
it now.
stacked them neatly in the corner of my room like props in a play. Elaine would glance at them when she passed my doorway, satisfaction flickering in her expression, and I could tell she took them as proof of victory. Greg saw them once and smirked like he'd been right about me all along. They believed I was retreating, and that belief made them careless. It made them bolder. That was useful. From upstairs, I could hear their plans unfolding. Elaine hosted small gatherings, inviting relatives over for coffee in the afternoons, speaking about the house as if it were already an asset under her management. I listened to her laugh too loudly and describe renovation ideas, debating paint colors, updated lighting, and the possibility of knocking out a wall. Each suggestion landed like an insult, not because I opposed change, but because she spoke as if Dad's presence had been erased from the foundation. Greg joined in with practical commentary about return on investment and how buyers love open layouts. It was grief converted into a sales pitch. What surprised me most wasn't their confidence. It was how easily other people participated. A cousin who had barely visited in years nodded along, offering suggestions about staging. An aunt mentioned how nice it would be to finally move on and turn the place into something new. No one said my name. No one asked where I was going. I stood upstairs hearing my father's life reduced to a real estate conversation and felt a slow, controlled anger settle into something steadier. This was not just about property. It was about who they believed had the right to rewrite Dad's legacy. In the middle of it all, I made my own quiet move. I scheduled a meeting with an attorney recommended by Dad's executor, and I did it without telling anyone. I drove to the office on a weekday morning when Elaine assumed I was running errands, and I carried copies of the deed inside a plain folder that looked unremarkable. The waiting room smelled faintly of carpet and printer ink, and the normalness of it helped. I wasn't there to fight emotionally. I was there to confirm reality. The attorney reviewed the documents with a careful, practiced seriousness. He didn't react dramatically. He simply checked the notarization, verified the dates, and then looked up at me with calm certainty. The deed was legally binding. The transfer had been completed properly years ago. The house
A
belonged
folded
to me.
paper slips
There was
free.
no shared ownership, no split,
Different
no
texture.
ambiguity. The clarity of that
Not
statement
official.
hit me harder than I expected, not because I doubted it, but because hearing it from someone outside my family made it feel immovable. It wasn't just something Dad had done quietly. It was something the law recognized, whether Elaine and Greg liked it or not. Walking back to my car afterward, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because I wasn't imagining things, because Dad had protected me in a way I hadn't fully understood while he was alive. Sadness because he believed he
Unfinished
needed to. That realization made me
business.
stop in the parking lot for a moment, my hand on the car door, the wind cold against my face. Dad had trusted me completely, enough to place the house in my name without fanfare. He had seen the entitlement I tried not to see. He had prepared for this exact situation, and the thought made my eyes sting in a way that felt both painful and honoring. Even with legal clarity in my pocket, I wrestled with the urge to confront Elaine and Greg immediately. Part of me wanted to end the charade with one sentence, to watch their confidence drain away the way heat leaves coffee when you ignore it too long. But another part of me, the part Dad raised with discipline, wanted dignity. I didn't want screaming, accusations, or scenes that could be twisted into a story about me being unstable. Elaine and Greg were skilled at turning any resistance into proof of my supposed immaturity. If I confronted them too early, they would pivot from confident to desperate. They would plead, then blame, then paint themselves as victims. I needed to choose the moment carefully, not for drama, but for control. So I stayed quiet and watched the illusion of power grow bigger. Elaine ordered new towels and talked about staging the guest room. Greg measured the living room wall and joked about where a bigger television could go. Their entitlement expanded into every corner of the house. And the more they acted like owners, the more evidence they created of their intent, the more reckless they became with their words. I noted everything, not obsessively, but attentively, like someone taking stock of who people really are when they believe they're winning. On the final week of those 30 days, the house felt like a showroom in progress. Elaine had removed personal items and replaced them with neutral decor, trying to make the rooms feel less lived in and more sellable. The irony almost made me laugh. She was staging my home for buyers she had no right to court. Greg kept checking his phone like he was waiting for confirmation that everything was lining up perfectly. Downstairs, I heard the doorbell ring more often, heard footsteps that didn't belong to family, heard Elaine's voice smoothing itself into charm. Then one morning, the moment arrived with the simple ease of inevitability. I came down the stairs and saw a stranger in the hallway, clipboard in hand, looking around with professional interest. Elaine stood beside him, smiling brightly, already in full performance mode. Greg hovered behind them, ready to talk numbers. The stranger introduced himself as the realtor and said he had paperwork ready for signatures so they could move forward. I paused at the bottom step, letting the scene settle in my mind like a photograph. Elaine's confidence was glowing. Greg's posture was triumphant. The realtor's pen was poised, waiting for the people he believed were the rightful sellers. And in that moment, I understood exactly how far they were willing to go when they thought I was leaving quietly. The realtor had arrived with paperwork they had no right to sign. The day they tried to sell my house was the day everything cracked. It didn't happen with shouting or slammed doors. It happened with a clipboard, polite small talk, and a stranger's shoes on a floor my father had refinished by hand. I stood in the hallway near the stairs, half in shadow, watching the realtor move from room to room with the calm efficiency of someone doing a familiar job. He nodded at the natural light in the living room, glanced at the corners of the ceiling.
All right, you're going over there.
Notes as if the home were already a product.
What was that?
Elaine floated beside him, smiling too brightly.
Stop complaining!
Like she'd lived here her whole life.
Oh, fine, I'll stop.
Greg followed a step behind, quiet but pleased, the way people get when they believe they're about to cash in. The house looked different in the daylight. Elaine had stripped it of small personal markers, replacing warmth with neutrality. The mantel was staged, the counters were bare, and even the air felt less like home and more like presentation. That was the first thing that made my stomach turn. Dad's presence had been reduced to square footage and curb appeal, and the person leading the tour acted like grief was merely a transition period before profit. I kept my face still, my hands relaxed at my sides, because I didn't want my emotions to take over the moment. I wanted to remember every detail, every word, every assumption they made while they thought I was powerless. The realtor ended the walkthrough in the dining room, where the table had been cleared and turned into a workspace. A neat stack of paperwork sat beside a pen, arranged with the kind of confidence that comes from believing everyone in the room is aligned.
I can't
Elaine
take
sat
this
down
anymore!
taking the seat closest to
This
the
is all
documents.
wrong!
Greg leaned over her shoulder as if he were
I'm
a partner in
done!
the deal.
I'm
The
leaving!
realtor explained steps, timelines, and disclosures, his voice smooth and practiced. He asked questions about repairs, taxes, and whether there were any liens or concerns. Elaine answered as if she were the sole authority, her tone calm, even maternal, like she was guiding a young professional through a simple transaction. Then the realtor paused in the way people do when they need to confirm something important without causing offense. He said,
So,
politely,
what do you think about
that
the
before
idea?
proceeding he'd need to verify deed information
sure.
and confirm who would be
Okay,
signing
well let
as
me
the
know if
legal
you change
owner.
your mind.
The question wasn't aggressive, it was standard. But I felt the room tighten
Greg,
anyway.
please calm down.
Elaine's smile didn't
Calm
falter.
down after big
Greg's
doing.
eyes flicked
That was
toward me
years
for
ago,
half
so
a
by
second,
far we're
then
past
away
it.
again.
Past it! You
as if he
betrayed
didn't
me! I
want to
can't
acknowledge
believe
my
you!
presence in that
This is
discussion.
insane!
Elaine replied
I've
with
been
complete
informed that a
certainty
move
she was
out
the
is
owner,
required.
that she and her son
The
would be
timeline is set
handling
for
the sale.
weeks, not
She
days.
spoke the words like they were already recorded somewhere official, like reality would match whatever she declared.
Please, just
Inside
listen to me.
tension rose like
I
heat
have
behind
been
glass.
listening.
Not panic,
Then agree
not
to
fear,
this.
but a sharp,
No.
controlled pressure.
I can't
In that
agree to
moment,
that.
I could
Why
see
not?
exactly
It's for the
how they saw
best.
me. I wasn't
My
a person
boundary
with
is
rights.
firm.
I was a
We
delay,
can still work
a
this
complication
out.
they expected
Work
to
what
manage.
out? It's over.
Elaine had staged the
But our
house,
history
brought in a
together,
realtor,
doesn't that
and laid
mean
out paperwork
anything?
while I still
It's
slept
too late,
upstairs.
Elaine.
And she had done it with a straight face. Greg stood there ready to sign something that didn't belong to him. Their entitlement wasn't theoretical anymore. It was active, confident, and nearly executed. I stepped forward from the hallway with deliberate calm, letting my footsteps be heard, so there was no surprise, no excuse for them to claim I had barged in. The realtor turned toward me with a polite expression, unsure whether I was part of the conversation or just a family member passing through. Elaine's smile tightened slightly.
End of
the
debate.
first crack. Greg's posture shifted, as if he sensed an interruption he couldn't control. I didn't rush. I didn't
I
raise
can't
my
believe
voice.
you're
I
suggesting
simply
that.
walked to the dining table
The evidence is
and
pretty
placed the
clear.
folder down with quiet finality.
No, it's
I said
not.
that before
You're
anyone
twisting
signed
things.
anything. The
Am
deed
I?
needed to be confirmed.
Yes.
My tone was even, almost
Under the law,
conversational,
you have the right
but
to
the
remain
words carried
silent.
weight. Elaine gave
Anything
a
you
short
say
laugh that
can and
sounded
will be
forced,
used
and
against
she
you in
tried to wave
court.
me off, repeating
You
that
have the right
everything
to an
was being
attorney
handled.
during questioning.
Greg's eyes narrowed, and the annoyance on his face flashed before he pulled it back into neutrality. I opened the folder and slid a copy of the deed across the table toward the realtor, making sure the document was visible. The name's clear,
Keys lie
the
on
date's
counter.
undeniable. For a brief
No
second,
one touches
no
them
one
now.
moved. The realtor leaned in, scanning the
Symbol
paper with
deflated.
professional attention, and his expression changed subtly as he read. Elaine's smile froze. Greg's jaw tightened. The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the faint buzz of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It wasn't dramatic silence. It was the kind that arrives when people realize their assumptions have been living on borrowed time. Elaine's eyes darted to the line that mattered most, and her face went pale in a way she couldn't hide. Greg leaned forward, reading faster,
Boundaries.
then looked up at me with a flash of anger that was almost boyish, like
Decision
a child caught
final.
taking something they assumed would never be questioned. Embarrassment followed right behind it, tightening his mouth as he tried to figure out how to recover. Elaine's hands hovered over the document, as if she wanted to snatch it away and erase it. But facts don't erase like that, not when they're stamped and signed. The realtor straightened and took a careful step back, not out of fear, but out of instinct to remove himself from conflict. His voice became more formal, more cautious, and he said he would need to pause the process until ownership was clarified. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't dramatize it. He simply acknowledged reality the way professionals do, with distance and caution. Elaine tried to speak over him, insisting there must be confusion, that she was Dad's wife, that the house was family property. Greg muttered something about me manipulating paperwork, as if the law were
I know
a
this
rumor
is
I had
difficult,
invented. Their words
but I can
came
assure
quickly,
you,
overlapping,
we have a strong
unsteady,
case.
not because
The evidence
they had
is
strong
clear,
arguments,
and the
but
outcome
because
is
their
certain.
entitlement was being
Trust
confronted
me
by
on
a
this.
fact it couldn't bend. I stayed composed, even as my heart thudded hard against my ribs.
This is Attorney J.
I didn't
Smith.
want
I understand
revenge.
the urgency.
I wanted clarity. I looked at
Backup is on
Elaine
the
and
way.
Greg and felt
Hold tight.
something shift. Their confidence wasn't strength, it was assumption. The moment assumption met documentation,
Facts
it
over
collapsed.
feelings.
I could see them scrambling mentally, searching for a way to reframe the situation into something that preserved their authority. That's what manipulators do when cornered. They don't accept truth. They try to rewrite it in real time. In that stillness, I felt my father's protection unfolding in a way that was almost unbearable. He had anticipated this. He had
You
prepared
can't
for it
just
quietly,
walk away
years
from
ago.
this.
And now his decision
After
was speaking
everything
for
we've
him
been
with the
through?
clean bluntness of ink.
Don't you dare
Dad wasn't
ignore
here to
me!
argue with Elaine or confront Greg, but he had left
This
something
conversation
stronger
is
than
over.
words behind.
You can't just walk
He had
away.
left certainty.
Watch
The
me.
realtor gathered his clipboard, his professionalism intact, but his caution clearly heightened. He said he would follow up once the parties had sorted out the documentation. Elaine's face tightened into something cold, and Greg's eyes stayed on me like he was measuring what I would do next. They were no longer smiling. They were no longer pretending
Yes,
this
this
was about my
belongs to me.
independence or my healing. The mask
I
had
am the
slipped,
owner.
and what was
It is
underneath was
mine.
not grief. It was resentment. As the realtor walked toward the door, Elaine turned
You
to me
can't
with a
be
look that
serious!
tried to
This is
mix disbelief
ridiculous!
and accusation
not
into one
moving.
expression.
This
Greg
ends
stepped
here.
closer,
You're making a
invading
huge
space the way
mistake.
people do when
The
they think
boundary is set.
proximity equals
Step
power.
back.
No one shouted,
You think
No
you
one
can
threw
just
anything.
walk away?
but the house felt
I
like
don't
it
want
was
any
holding
trouble.
its breath.
Too
I
late
could
for
sense
that.
the moment they fully
Back down
understood
now.
what this meant.
I'm not
Not
intimidated
just
by
for the
you.
sale, but
You
for
will
every
be.
plan they'd been building.
You did this.
That was when they
I can't
realized
believe
I
you'd
wasn't
betray me
leaving.
like this.
But someone
How
else
could
might
you,
have
after
to.
everything we
Power
just
shifts
has
are rarely
all? I
loud.
trust you.
They are
You
felt
waste
in the
any
silence
remess.
after
Say,
truth lands.
look at me.
After
Tell me the
realtor
truth now.
left, the house didn't explode
Elaine,
into
I
chaos
think we
the way
need to be
people
honest
imagine
here.
confrontation does.
Honest?
It tightened
After all
instead,
this
like a
pretense,
room where
masks
the air
dropped,
has
I
been
see.
pulled out.
Elaine, wait.
Elaine
Let's
stood
talk.
near the dining table
Talk,
with
your
her
actions
hands
spoke
braced against the
volumes.
edge, staring at the deed copy as if it were a personal insult. Greg hovered beside her, his
Witness
shoulders
gone.
rigid, his eyes fixed on me with a stare that tried to turn anger into intimidation. No one spoke for a few seconds, and that quiet was heavier than yelling, because it forced the truth to sit between us without distraction. Elaine recovered first, because she was practiced at turning shock into offense.
The foundation is
She accused
settling
me
and
of
the cracks
deception,
are a
her
concern.
voice
The
rising
roof
just
needs
enough to
replacing
sound
and the
wounded,
plumbing is
but not enough to
outdated
sound
and the
guilty.
neighbors mentioned flooding.
She said
Should we
I had
discuss
hidden
this?
things, manipulated
Hello, are you
paperwork,
listening?
and waited until the last second to embarrass her in front of a stranger.
Conflict, not
The
his.
word betrayal came out like she owned it, like she could claim the moral high ground simply by speaking it. Greg echoed her, saying it was disgusting that I would pull something like this right after Dad died, as if Dad's death gave them the right to do whatever they wanted, and my honesty was the real crime. I listened without interrupting, Because
Please,
I
let's not do
recognized the
this
tactic
now.
now.
You
If they
started
could
this,
paint me as
Elaine.
sneaky,
How
they
dare
could
you
avoid
say that to
admitting
me?
they had tried
The
to sell a
truth
house they
hurts.
didn't own.
This is
If
ridiculous.
they
You're
could
stealing
make me feel
everything.
ashamed, they could regain control of the
The
conversation.
process must pause.
Elaine's
Ownership
eyes
is
glistened with
unclear.
carefully summoned
Unclear?
tears,
How?
and her voice
The
softened
sale
into
is
something
halted until
almost
it's
maternal
resolved.
again as she asked how I
So
could do
what
this in
now?
family.
We wait.
Greg used the sharper approach, muttering about respect and how Dad would be disappointed. They were both reaching for the same lever: guilt. It had always worked before, but guilt feels different when you've done nothing wrong. Standing there, I felt the strange reversal of everything they had tried to do. For weeks they had treated me like the one without power, the one who needed permission to exist in that house. Now the truth was sitting on the table, and they were the ones scrambling to make it mean something else. Their gaslighting didn't stop, it simply flipped direction. Instead of telling me I was imagining their intentions, they tried to convince me my own reality was immoral. They spoke as if I had stolen something from them, as if the deed were a trick rather than a decision my father made years ago. Their accusations sparked
The
something
inspection
in me
reveals
that wasn't
significant
rage,
structural
but clarity.
issues. Moisture
I thought
damage are
about the years I
extensive. The
spent
roof
showing
needs
up in
immediate
ways that
replacement.
never got
Electrical
reported.
and plumbing
I
systems are
remembered Dad's
outdated. This
appointments,
will
the
impact
nights he couldn't
evaluation.
sleep,
Let's look
the
at
way I learned to read
123 Oak
prescription
Street.
labels like they were instructions for
The
keeping a
details
life
are
intact.
all
I
here.
remembered carrying groceries,
As you can see,
handling
the
small
name
repairs,
is
making
clearly
sure the house
visible.
stayed steady while Elaine and Greg drifted in and
Before
out,
anything's
offering
signed, the
opinions
deed
instead
needs
of help.
checking.
The emotional labor had been invisible, and now even the grief was being treated like a resource they could use. The realization didn't make me bitter. It made me certain. I told Elaine that I hadn't deceived anyone. I had discovered the deed because Dad kept his documents in his study, and I had confirmed it legally because I wasn't willing to gamble my future on anyone's feelings. I kept my tone even, because I didn't want the moment to turn into a scene they could later retell as proof I was unstable. Elaine scoffed and said legality wasn't
So the deal is
everything.
off?
That family mattered
It looks
more.
that way.
Greg tried to twist that into an accusation, saying I cared more about money than people. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't been so calculated. They were the ones who brought in a realtor. They were the ones talking about splitting proceeds. Yet now they wanted me to feel greedy for stopping them. That night, I called the attorney again, not because I doubted
The
anything,
first step is
but
to
because I
price the
wanted
home
certainty on every
competitively based
angle.
on the market
The
analysis.
conversation was short and
Then
clear.
we'll prepare the
The house was
listing
mine.
and schedule professional
Elaine and Greg
photography.
had no legal claim to ownership.
After that, the home
They
goes on the
also could not
market.
evict me from my own property, and any attempt they made to force me out would be meaningless. The attorney explained next steps in calm terms, the same way a doctor explains a diagnosis: documented, procedural, unemotional. He recommended I communicate boundaries in writing and avoid escalating conflict. Hearing it laid out that plainly steadied me. Facts were my anchor now. The next morning, Elaine tried a different approach. She spoke softly, asking if we could work something out, as if I had created the problem and could now fix it by being generous. Greg stayed in the background, letting her lead, his silence calculating. I realized then that their entitlement wasn't collapsing into shame, it was reshaping into negotiation. They weren't sorry. They were adapting. That was the difference between regret and strategy, and it told me what my next move needed to be. I set boundaries with the calmness Dad had always modeled. I told Elaine and Greg they needed to start making plans to move out. I didn't say it with cruelty, and I didn't say it with triumph. I said it like a decision that had already been made, because legally and morally it had. I offered a reasonable timeline, not because they deserved
And here we
comfort,
cross the
but
threshold
because I
into
wanted
the
process
entryway.
to stay dignified.
Notice the beautiful
I gave
hardwood
them weeks,
floors.
not days,
This
and I made
space
it
makes
clear
a
that the house would
wonderful
not be
first
sold,
impression.
and my name would not be used in any further discussions with realtors. Greg immediately bristled, accusing me of throwing them out after Dad's death. Elaine pressed a hand to her chest like she might faint. Their performances were different, but the goal was the same: make me feel monstrous for
The
asserting
timing
what
was
mine.
crucial.
That's where the emotional
I
conflict
understand
hit hardest.
completely.
I wasn't heartless. I wasn't immune to the weight of family, even a family
Okay,
that
this
had
wall
failed
is
me.
definitely
I felt a
12
pull of
feet.
guilt, the old reflex
Yes,
that
this
told me
archway is
boundaries were
perfect.
selfish
So
and peace
grand.
required my sacrifice.
See, no need to
But
double
another
check. It'll be
voice,
flawless.
steadier and newer,
Piece of cake.
reminded me of what Dad had tried to teach. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. If I let them stay indefinitely, if I let their manipulation soften my resolve, the house would never truly be mine. It would remain a contested space, a place where my life had to bend around other people's entitlement. One afternoon, I stood in the hallway and picked up Dad's key ring from the hook by the door. The metal felt heavier than it should have, not because of the keys themselves, but because of what they represented. For weeks, Elaine had treated those keys like symbols of her authority, placing them on tables, moving them, acting as if she controlled access. I closed my hand around them and slipped them into my pocket with a quiet finality. As I walked past the framed photo of Dad near the staircase, I paused.
See,
His eyes
I
in
knew
that
you'd
picture
come
looked
around.
steady, almost
Yeah,
knowing.
you were right
It wasn't comforting exactly. It
about
was
that.
grounding. It
Wait,
reminded me
what?
that he had
You
chosen
chopped the
this
wrong
outcome,
peppers.
not
You
out of
said
spite,
green.
but out of protection. Elaine began
I'll consider
scrambling
my
after that.
options.
I heard her on the phone with relatives,
Nothing
her voice
promised.
urgent, shifting between indignation and pleading. I saw her searching listings on her laptop late at night, flipping through pages with tense movements. Greg started coming and going more often, avoiding me when he could, then cornering me when he thought he could wear me down with sarcasm. Their entitlement had lost its certainty.
30
And without
days.
certainty, they looked
That's
smaller,
the timeline
more frantic.
we're imposing.
Still, the house wasn't peaceful yet. It was mine on paper and in law, but emotionally it was still crowded with their resentment. By the end of the week, the rooms felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer. I could sit at the kitchen table without feeling like I was waiting to be removed. I could walk
I'm
through the
taking
living
back
room
control,
without watching for
Jerry.
what was being
Control
taken from me.
over what?
The house finally
This
felt like
place,
it belonged
us.
to me, but
That's
peace
not
had
how
not
this
yet
works.
arrived.
It is now.
When they finally left, the house didn't feel victorious. It felt
I know
hollow.
this is hard,
The moving
but
truck
it's for
arrived
your
early
own
in the
good.
morning, its engine
This
rumbling
change will
against
help
the
you
quiet
in
of
the
the
long
neighborhood,
run.
like an announcement
Please,
no one had
trust
asked
me
for.
on this.
I stood at the front window and watched strangers
I know this is hard,
carry out
but it's for the
boxes labeled
best.
in Elaine's
This
careful
change will
handwriting.
help you.
Greg moved quickly,
You can start
avoiding eye
over somewhere
contact,
new.
directing traffic with
This
clipped
is care,
instructions that
not
sounded
harm.
more like frustration than authority.
We have
There
reached
were
a
no dramatic
verdict.
goodbyes,
The
no
evidence
final
is
arguments,
conclusive.
just
What
the
is
dull
it?
rhythm of footsteps
You
and
are
cardboard
responsible.
scraping against
No,
wood
that's
floors
impossible.
My father had
The
once
decision
polished
is final.
with pride. Furniture that had filled
I'll
the
set
living room
these
for years
cups.
disappeared in a matter of hours. The couch, the side tables,
There.
the decorative pieces
Authority
Elaine
is
had insisted
assumed.
on bringing in after Dad passed. They all went out the door in measured trips.
The house looks
Each removal
unchanged.
left behind
The
an
illusion
imprint on
is
the
still
carpet,
intact,
a faint
but
square where weight
conflict
had
is
settled
waiting
for too
inside.
long. The house began to echo in a way it hadn't before. Voices bounced off walls and returned thinner, less certain. Even the closing of the front door sounded different, sharper, as if the house itself was adjusting to the shift. I stayed mostly out of the way, not because I was avoiding them, but because I didn't need to witness every piece of their exit. I had already endured the harder part. When the last box was loaded and the truck door slammed shut, Elaine stood on the porch for a brief
Ownership
second,
clearly
her
marked.
expression
No
unreadable.
ambiguity.
Greg lingered beside
As you can
her,
see, it's
keys in
clearly
hand,
marked right
as if
here.
expecting me to say something that would
No
change
ambiguity
everything.
whatsoever.
I didn't. I simply nodded once, calm and composed. There were no apologies exchanged, no reconciliations attempted. The engine started, and they drove away, shrinking down the street until they were just another vehicle turning a corner. When the sound of the truck faded,
The deed is
silence that
valid.
followed was heavier than I anticipated. I closed the front door gently and leaned against it, listening. The house was empty in a way it hadn't been even during Dad's final days. Then it had held grief and tension and presence. Now it held space. I walked into the kitchen and stood at the table where so many decisions had been forced upon me. The surface was bare. No stacks of mail, no staged decor, no forced smiles. Just wood and light. Relief came first, quiet and steady. I could breathe without anticipating criticism or manipulation. I could move through rooms without
deposition
feeling
is at
watched or
2.
measured.
I'll
But
send the
alongside
files
that
now.
relief came sadness that surprised me with its depth. Not sadness for Elaine or Greg specifically, but for what the house had endured. For the way grief had turned into competition. For the way my father's legacy had nearly been reduced to profit margins. The silence felt bittersweet, like a chapter closing without applause. I walked through each room slowly, noticing how sound traveled differently now. My footsteps echoed in the hallway that once felt crowded with tension. The guest room, stripped of its staged neutrality, looked honest again. I opened windows one by one, letting fresh air move through spaces that had felt stagnant for weeks. Curtains lifted gently in the breeze, and sunlight stretched across the floors in long golden lines. Dust particles floated lazily in the beams of light, visible and harmless. It felt like the house was exhaling. In the hallway near the staircase, Dad's framed photo
The timing
remained
is
exactly
everything
where
in
I
this
had left it.
market.
I paused there.
I'm not
studying
assuming
his
anything, but we
expression.
have to consider
For
the
weeks,
risks.
That image had felt like silent
And the
witness to
market?
conflict.
It
Now
you
felt like
assume the
quiet
best and plan
affirmation.
for the worst.
I realized something as I stood there. The battle hadn't just been about property. It had been about dignity, about refusing to be erased from a place I helped hold together. Dad's decision to transfer the house to me wasn't just legal protection. It was recognition, Cleaning became part of my healing. I wiped down surfaces not out of obligation, but out of intention. I cleared out cabinets that had been reorganized without my input and restored small items to where they belonged. I removed decorative pieces that never felt like mine and brought back familiar photographs, books, and objects that carried history rather than performance. Each action felt deliberate, not reactive. I wasn't undoing Elaine's presence out of spite. I was reclaiming balance. Financial stability settled in quietly as well. I sat at the kitchen table one evening with a stack of bills and account information, organizing everything under my name. Mortgage documents, insurance policies, utilities. I reviewed each one carefully. There was comfort in understanding numbers clearly, in seeing what was owed and what was secure. The attorney had ensured the deed was properly recorded, and that no further claims could be made. Legally, the house was anchored. There would be no surprise visits from realtors, no hidden attempts to list it again. That certainty allowed me to think about the future without fear. The transformation wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. I no longer felt like a displaced child waiting for permission to exist. I felt like a homeowner with responsibility and agency. The shift happened internally before it showed externally. I noticed it in the way I moved through the living room without hesitating, in the way I sat at the head of the table without second, guessing whether I belonged there. Quiet empowerment replaced the defensive posture I had carried for weeks. One afternoon, I returned to Dad's study. The chair still creaked in the same familiar way when I sat down, but this time the sound felt welcoming.
She exits
instead of
the study
fragile.
quietly.
I organized his files
The
carefully.
door closes
keeping
without
what
a
mattered
sound.
and archiving what needed
The
preservation.
truth is
The
concealed.
locked drawer was no longer a secret waiting to be discovered. It was part of the story I now understood fully. I placed the original deed in a secure file and closed the drawer with calm certainty. The room felt restored, not frozen in grief, but steady.
She checks
Outside,
dates
I
again.
began tending to the garden Dad loved. Weeds
Years
had crept into the
before
flower
illness.
beds during the chaos of the past month, unnoticed
Deliberate
while tension
protection.
dominated the house. I knelt in the soil and pulled them out one by one, breathing in the scent of earth and early summer air. The rhythm of it grounded me. Growth requires maintenance, boundaries require reinforcement, and peace requires participation. Evenings became quieter in a different way. I made dinner without bracing for comments. I sat in the living room with a book and let silence exist without interpreting it as threat. The house, once filled with whispered plans and controlled accusations, now held only my thoughts. It was strange how quickly a space can shift from battleground to refuge when the right people remain. Yet, as the days passed and routines settled into something steady, I felt a subtle awareness that something was unfinished. The legal battle was over. The house was secure. The tension had dissipated into distance. But closure isn't always delivered by paperwork or moving trucks. Sometimes it waits for a different kind of decision, one that has nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with the heart. I thought the battle was over, but closure required one final choice. Closure doesn't come from winning. It comes from understanding why the fight happened. A week after the moving truck disappeared down the street and the house finally settled into a quieter rhythm, I found myself back in Dad's study again. Not because I needed proof of anything anymore, but because something in me still felt unfinished, like the house had become mine before my heart knew how to hold it. The room smelled the same as it always had: paper, wood, faint traces of aftershave that I couldn't prove were still there but swore I could sense. I opened drawers slowly, reorganizing files with the kind of care you give to things that mattered to someone you loved. Most of it was ordinary. Tax documents, home insurance renewals, warranty papers for appliances Dad insisted on keeping even after they expired. I worked in steady silence, stacking folders, labeling what I would keep, setting aside what I could shred.
Older
Then,
dates
tucked
than
behind a
expected.
thick envelope of legal forms, I noticed a
Preparation,
smaller piece of
not
paper
panic.
folded in half. It wasn't part of a packet. It didn't have letterhead or official stamps. It looked like something placed intentionally, something meant to be found rather than filed. My first instinct was to set it down and continue. I didn't know why I hesitated, but it felt like opening it would change the temperature of the room. A letter from Dad, in his handwriting, was not the kind of thing you read casually. It would be his voice reaching into a future he wouldn't live to see, and that kind of contact can feel overwhelming even when you want it. I sat down in his chair, the familiar creak beneath me, and held the folded paper for a long moment without unfolding it. My thumb traced the edge, feeling the slight roughness of the page. Then I took a breath and opened it carefully, as if it might tear under the weight of my emotions. His handwriting was unmistakable. Steady, slightly slanted, deliberate, like every word had been chosen with intention. Seeing it made my throat tighten immediately. It didn't matter that I had seen his notes 1,000 times on grocery lists or... This was different. It wasn't a reminder about errands or a number scribbled in a margin. It was a message meant to outlast him, and I felt suddenly younger, like I was back in childhood waiting for his guidance. The letter didn't start with drama. It started with quiet honesty. Dad wrote that if I was reading this, it meant he wasn't there to explain things the way he would have preferred. He wrote that he trusted me, not because I was perfect, but because I was steady. He said he had watched me carry weight without asking for credit, that he had seen how I showed up even when no one thanked me. Reading those lines hit me like a hand on my shoulder. For so long, I had questioned whether my sacrifices were invisible, whether my loyalty had mattered. Here it was, in his own words, recognized and named. He wrote about protection in a way that made my chest ache. He said he had transferred the house into my name years ago, because he wanted to make sure I would always have a place that couldn't be taken from you by someone louder, colder, or more entitled. He didn't write Elaine's name, and he didn't mention Greg directly, but his meaning was clear. He said he had observed the way certain people treated love like a transaction and family like a hierarchy. He admitted he had tried to keep peace while he was alive, because conflict would have poisoned the home, but he couldn't ignore the patterns he saw. He didn't want my future to depend on anyone else's mood or generosity. As I read, tears rose without warning. Not the sharp, panicked kind I'd fought back during the funeral, but slow tears that came with relief. Dad had known. He had known I was being underestimated, and he had done something about it. He had prepared for a day when he wouldn't be able to stand between me and the people who saw me as expendable. The realization made me feel both grateful and devastated. Grateful because he had protected me. Devastated because he had felt the need to. The letter acknowledged my caregiving in a way no one else ever had.
And for
He
me?
wrote about the nights I stayed
Sorry,
up,
we're
the
out of
rides to
cups.
appointments,
I see.
the way I handled small details that made
Let's
life
just
manageable
begin.
when his body started failing him. He wrote that he noticed how I never made him feel like a burden, how I treated his dignity as something worth guarding. Those lines broke something open in me. For weeks, Elaine and Greg had implied I was
Look at
the
this
burden,
beautiful
the
home.
dependent,
The roof
the
line
one who
gives it
needed to
such
be pushed out to
character.
grow up.
And these
Dad's
windows
words
let
reversed
in
that narrative
so much
completely.
natural light.
They reminded
It's a
me that I
really
wasn't
inviting
staying because I was
space,
weak.
perfect for your
I had
needs.
stayed because I was loyal.
Hi! Oh
What
my gosh,
stunned me
it's so
most
good
was
to
his
see
clarity
you.
about what this all
Elaine, you
meant.
too. How have you
Dad
been?
wrote that the house was
Amazing!
never
The
just
sun
a
is out.
house.
I'm so
It was a
happy.
symbol
You
of
look great.
stability,
We'll
of
talk
hard
soon.
work,
You
of a
too.
life he built with
Bye!
intention. He wrote that giving it to me wasn't about property. It was about dignity. It was his way of saying that I belonged, that my place in the world wasn't something others could vote on after he was gone. He didn't want me begging for a place at a table I had helped set. Reading that line, I felt my shoulders drop as if I had been holding tension there for years without noticing. I sat with the letter for a long time after I finished reading. The room was quiet except for my breathing. I wiped my face and looked around the study, seeing it not as a battlefield of documents and secrets, but as a space where Dad had tried to protect me in the only way he could. My grief shifted again, turning softer around the edges. It didn't disappear, but it stopped feeling like a question. It became a presence I could live with.
This section seems
In that
inconsistent
moment,
with
I
the prior
realized I no
data.
longer
Let me
doubted my
see.
worth.
You're right.
The
The
past
projections
weeks
don't
had stirred
align.
up old
We
insecurities.
need to adjust these
The
figures
kind
before
that grow when you're
proceeding.
treated like
Good
an
catch.
inconvenience.
Let's prioritize that.
Dad's words cut through them with finality. The fight with Elaine and Greg had been ugly, but it had revealed something important. The conflict wasn't about money. It was about power, control, and the refusal to see me as legitimate. Winning legally had secured the house, but understanding why Dad acted had secured something deeper inside me. I placed the letter back in my hands and smoothed it carefully, as if I
Hello?
could
Yes,
preserve
I'm
the
here.
warmth of his touch
Greg,
through paper.
we need to talk about
Then
the
I
shipment.
stood, walked
Okay,
into
go
the
ahead.
hallway,
I'm listening.
and took down the
There's
framed
been a
photo of him near the
complication.
staircase.
It might be
I
compromised.
opened the back,
I
slid
understand.
the letter
I'll
inside
handle it.
behind the photograph, and sealed it in place. It felt right to keep his words close, not hidden away in a drawer, but present where I could remember them. A quiet reminder that he had seen me fully. Forgiveness came next, but not in the way people like to romanticize. I didn't forgive Elaine and Greg to absolve them or invite them back into my life. I forgave in the only way that mattered. I let go of the need to keep replaying their betrayal. I released the part of me that wanted them to understand or admit what they did. That kind of forgiveness wasn't reconciliation. It was freedom. It meant they no longer had a permanent place in my mind, even if their shadows had touched my home. With the truth fully revealed, The house felt less like a contested prize and more like a legacy entrusted to me. I stood in the hallway, the framed photo back in place, sunlight spilling across the floor, and I understood what the final choice was. I wasn't deciding whether I deserved to stay. That had been settled. I was deciding what kind of life I wanted inside these walls. Freedom doesn't always mean leaving. It sometimes means staying on your own terms. Months passed after Elaine and Greg drove away, and the house stopped feeling like a place that had survived a storm. It started feeling like a place that could breathe again. At first the changes were small, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. I replaced one burned-out bulb and realized I didn't have to announce it or ask permission. I fixed a loose cabinet hinge and felt something shift inside me, as if each simple repair stitched a torn part of my life back together. Gradually, the house moved from being a reminder of conflict to becoming a space I could shape with intention. I painted slowly, room by room, choosing colors that felt calm rather than performative. The living room went first. I didn't pick anything trendy or staged. I chose a warm neutral that softened the light without erasing the character of the wall. As the paint dried, the room felt less like a showroom and more like an invitation. I rearranged furniture based on how I actually lived, not how someone else thought a buyer might want it. I moved Dad's old armchair closer to the window, where sunlight fell in the afternoon, and I placed a small table beside it for a book and a coffee mug. It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. It was mine. The quiet mornings became my favorite part of the day. I would wake before the neighborhood fully stirred, make coffee, and sit by the window the way I used to sit upstairs during those tense weeks. Only now, the stillness wasn't loaded with dread. It was peaceful. I could listen to the soft sounds of the house settling, to birds outside, to the occasional distant car, and feel grounded instead of guarded. The sunrise would flood the living room in slow bands of light, and the warmth would spread across the floor like a promise renewed each day. I learned to enjoy silence again, not as an absence, but as a form of stability. With time, my grief changed shape. It never disappeared, but it stopped ambushing me. Instead of feeling like a constant ache, it became something I carried with quiet respect. I could think about Dad and smile without immediately feeling the sting of loss. I remembered his habits more fondly than painfully, his insistence on fixing things himself, his quiet pride in paying bills on time, the way he double-checked door locks at night without making a fuss. Those memories no longer felt like anchors holding me back. They felt like roots, steadying me. Looking back, I could see the journey clearly, even the parts I wished had never happened. I had moved from grief to awakening in a way I didn't choose, but I couldn't deny it had changed me. I remembered the humiliation of sitting at the kitchen table while Elaine and Greg spoke, as if my life was an item on an agenda. I remembered the cold moment of being told I had 30 days to leave. I remembered the strange calm of watching them plan a sale they had no right to make. Those moments used to replay in my mind like scenes I couldn't turn off. Now they played like lessons I had already absorbed. I understood how easily kindness can be mistaken for weakness, and how important it is to protect your dignity before someone else decides it's negotiable. Generational closure didn't arrive as a dramatic revelation. It arrived in the way I cared for the house the way Dad had cared for it. I kept up with maintenance, not out of fear, but out of pride. I tended the garden regularly, pulling weeds before they could take over, trimming bushes the way Dad taught me. When something needed repair, I handled it quickly, hearing his voice in my head reminding me that small problems become big ones when ignored. Carrying his legacy forward didn't mean turning the house into a shrine. It meant living with the same steadiness he lived with, honoring what he built by preserving it and growing within it. Financial stability became part of that growth. I set up a budget that accounted for home expenses, savings, and long-term security. I made a calendar for yearly maintenance and built an emergency fund
House
the way
behind
Dad
her.
always encouraged. For the first time in a long time,
Foundation
I felt like my
solid.
future wasn't floating. It was anchored. The house
Identity
wasn't just
anchored.
emotional safety anymore. It was practical stability.
She steps
It was a
forward
base that allowed me
confidently,
to plan without fear of being uprooted
not
by
leaving,
someone else's
choosing.
decisions. That clarity gave me a
Power
sense of peace I hadn't
reframed.
realized I was missing. The biggest transformation, though,
Life
wasn't
continues.
the paint or the furniture or the reorganized bills.
No
It was
fear.
psychological. The experience with Elaine and Greg forced me to build boundaries I had avoided for years. I started noticing manipulation faster, not just in family dynamics, but in everyday relationships. I stopped over-explaining myself. I stopped apologizing for having needs. When someone tried to guilt me into giving more than I could afford emotionally, I learned to step back without panic. The house became my proof that setting boundaries didn't ruin my life. It saved it. Justice unfolded without me needing to chase it. Elaine and Greg didn't receive some dramatic punishment, but consequences found them in quieter ways. Their plans collapsed publicly enough to bruise their pride, and their sense of entitlement no longer had a stage in my home. They had to figure out their own housing, their own stability, their own futures without taking mine. That was the only justice I truly needed. Not revenge,
A new
not
day
humiliation,
begins.
just separation. Just the end of their access
No
to my
conflict
peace.
present.
One morning, months later, I stood
Strength
near the front door with Dad's
remains.
key ring in my hand. I had kept it, not because I needed every key on it, but because it reminded me of what the house had cost him, and what it now represented for me. The metal was cool against my palm. For a moment, I thought about how Elaine had placed those
Protection.
keys on the table, as if she could assign ownership by gesture. I thought about how Greg had looked at me like I would always fold under pressure. Then I looked around at the living room, sunlight
Darkness
pouring in
gentle,
through the windows,
not threatening.
the new paint softening the light,
Sleep earned.
the furniture arranged for real living
Cycle
instead of
ends.
appearances. The house felt steady beneath my feet, and I felt steady inside it. I walked to the hallway where Dad's framed photo still hung near the staircase. I didn't stop there every day anymore, but sometimes I caught it in my peripheral vision and felt a quiet gratitude. Behind that photo, the letter rested, close enough to remind me of what mattered when doubt tried to creep in. Dad had trusted me completely, and living here now wasn't just inheritance. It was proof that he had been right to trust me, and proof that I could trust myself. By the time the next spring arrived, the house finally felt like home in the fullest sense. Not because it was perfect, but because it was peaceful. Not because it had no history, but because its history no longer controlled me. I understood then that the house had always been mine in more ways than one. I had cared for it. I had protected it. And when it was threatened, I had found the strength to stand my ground without losing myself. They tried to take my home after my father died, but what they gave me instead was something far greater, the unshakable knowledge that I would never let anyone diminish my worth again. In the end, the house was never just about walls or paperwork. It was about who I chose to become when everything was stripped away. They mistook my silence for weakness and my grief for surrender, but both were simply phases of becoming stronger. My father didn't just leave me a home, he left me proof
This
that I
place
was
holds
worthy
so
of
many
security,
memories.
respect, and
I'm
trust.
grateful.
The people who tried to erase me only revealed how firmly
Not
I
with
belonged.
grief, but with
And now,
thanks.
every time I turn the key in my own front door, I'm reminded that I didn't just keep the house, I reclaimed myself. If this story made you feel something, anger, validation, strength, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to someone who needs the reminder that quiet people are not powerless, and that dignity is worth defending. There are more stories like this, real, layered, and unapologetically honest, waiting
Past
to be told.
discarded.
And you're part of what keeps them
Old
alive.
empty boxes
Stay connected to
flattened.
this space if you believe in protecting your
Thrown
peace
away.
and standing your ground without losing your character.
False exit
And
erased.
before you go, tell me this. What country are you watching from right now?